Hello, learners, and welcome back to the course on social processes and behavioral issues. Today, we are in Unit 9 and Session 2, and we continue from the previous session where we had introduced the concept and the meaning of personality and the four important theories that personality has been influenced by. So, we had covered the type theories, the trait theories, the psychoanalytic theory, and the socio psychological theory. Now, today in this session, we continue from where we had left off in the previous session, and specifically, we shall be moving ahead and we will be looking at the last theory, last major theory of personality, which is also called as the self theory. Now, in this session, we are more interested to know that what determines human personality. So, we will be looking at four different categories of determinants. They are called as biological determinants, cultural determinants, the socialization process, and situational factors. So now let us first go ahead and finish the theoretical influences on personality and our discussions around it. Now, the last meta theory of personality which has influenced the thought on personality is called as the self theory. The self theory emphasizes on the totality and interrelatedness of all behavior. So, your frame is basically internal in the self theory, and there have been many proponents of the self theory like Maslow, Herzberg, Lewin, and Rogers. A very important contribution is from Carl Rogers in what he calls as the self theory. Now, this includes four major prime factors, and what are they? The first is the self image. What is the meaning of the self image? This is how a person sees himself or herself. Now, there is also something called as the ideal self. Now, the ideal self is what our personality should be or what we want our personality to be. Now, the third is also the third point or the third factor here is a very interesting concept which is called as the looking glass self. Now, this is the self where we perceive or where we look at how others see us. Now, please remember the looking glass self is talking of perception and is not really emphasizing on reality. So, looking glass self is our perception, how others around us see us or view us. Now, the last, of course, is the real self. So, once again, I go through all of these factors. The first is called as the self image, our own image of our own self. Then the ideal self, which is where we want to be. This is what we think our personality should be. These are the values that we should purport, etc. Now, the looking glass self talks of, or is looking at the perception of an individual about how he or she thinks the world views him or her. So, what is our perception of the people around us as to how do they see us is what the looking glass self is. Now, perception and reality are very often two different things. So, here in looking glass self, the focus is on perception. And the last, of course, is the real self. So, once again, if I were to sum up our discussions on the theoretical influences on personality, we are basically looking at five different theories, and these have had very overarching influences on the thought and research on personality. So, they are the type, the trait, the psychoanalytic, the social psychological, and now the self theory. Now, after a discussion on theoretical influences of personality, we need to move ahead and look at biological factors, which are the first category of determinants of personality. So basically, we ask ourselves a question that what determines human personality? The first category of determinants are biological in nature, where we are looking at the first factor, which is biological, that's called as heredity. Heredity refers to those factors such as physical stature, facial beauty, and muscle composition, which are considered to be determined at conception. You basically have got no much influence on these factors, and these factors, very often shape the personality that you do carry. Now, the University of Minnesota studies on twins had proved that heredity plays a very important role in personality. Now, the next factor here is equally interesting where we are looking at genetic engineering and intelligence. Now, today, with the advancement of technology and research, we have been talking about controlling the genes and human personality. So, when we talk of things like Dolly the sheep cloning, we are also talking about a similar cloning that may happen with human personality. So, this is an area that is tremendously looked into when we are looking at the shaping of personality. The third factor here is management thinking, where managers and leaders think differently than others. So, for example, senior executives have more capacity for looking at things differently, they have more capacity for looking at out of the box ideas. Now, the next point here is senior managers are more flexible in nature. Senior managers have shown a stronger capacity for integrating things, or as we understand popularly, in the words of Steve Jobs, connecting the dots. So, these are certain personality prototypes or personality traits which are associated with management thinking. Now, coming to the fourth factor, another interesting area which is looking at the split brain thinking. The split brain psychology can be traced to Henry Mintzberg's article, Planning on the Left Side and Managing to the Right. So, the kind of personality that we may have is very often determined by which part of the brain is functioning in the way in which we behave and do things. Now, the fifth factor here is the biofeedback. Now, until the recent past, it was believed by psychologists as well as physiologists that involuntary functions such as the brain wave pattern, blood pressure fluctuations cannot be consciously controlled. Now, this is an idea that has gone out of the window today with advancement in research and technology. We are able to control these involuntary functions, thus having the right to control something as individual as the human personality. The last is physical characteristics and the rate of maturing. Now, herein, Sheldon's classic theory correlating body builds and personality traits is equally important, that a certain stature, a certain body build, a certain height, certain physical characteristics have the power to shape the way an individual sees himself or herself. Now, similarly, the rate of maturing, like for example, fast and slow maturing children and their associated personality can be discerned very early. Now, the idea here is that if I look at a fast maturing child, he or she is expected to have a different personality than a slow maturing child. So, once again, what are those six biological factors which might determine personality? They are heredity, genetic engineering and intelligence, management thinking, split brain thinking, biofeedback, and physical characteristics as well as the rate of maturing. Now, these are basically, when we are talking of biological factors, we are looking at something which is very innate or very individual in nature, innate to the person or very individual in nature. But then, personality determinants have not only looked within, they have also looked outside of the individual. So, when we move ahead, we come to the next category of determinants, which are called as cultural and familial traditions. It's not only the innate being that influences the human personality, it's also the environment around us which plays a tremendous shape in building what we understand as our personality. Now, culture has long influenced something that you understand as a learned response. There are hundreds of responses that you learn, and you learn it as a part of the culture that you are a part of. Now, it's said that certain personality traits are culture dependent. For example, when we are looking at huge societal cultural frameworks which have been developed by researchers like Hofstede, where they have categorized societies into, basing on certain cultural values like individualism and collectivism. I will only take one example of individualism and collectivism. Now, according to Hofstede, there are certain societies in which the individual has more primacy than a group. In other societies, the group has more primacy over the individual. So, for example, let us look at an individual society. Now, It is said that the United States is more individualistic in nature, where certain cultural traits like independent thinking, creative thinking, thinking out of the box become more prominent. Whereas when you're looking at collective societies or collectivist societies like Japan, the group is very important. So, obedience, loyalty, and allegiance to the group assume more importance than others. Now, in complex countries like India or complex societies like India, you not only have cultures, but you also have the growth of subcultures. These subcultures can be based on caste, they can be based on religion, they can be based on family, etc. Now, these subcultures also have tremendous impact on the way personality shapes. Equally important, apart from culture, is the role of the family. Family plays a large role in shaping personality, and it's basically the home environment that we are talking about that shapes the personality. So, for example, when you are looking at children who have been brought up in foster homes or orphanages, they might have a very different kind of a personality than the people or than children who have been born and brought up with a lot of loving care in very supportive home environments. So, when we are talking of culture and familial traditions, they also address this debate of nature versus nurture. So, is it the heredity of an individual that plays a very important factor in shaping his or her personality, or is it the nurture that may come out of the family, or the environment that a person is subjected to? So, if we look at this, there are two sets of attributes which ultimately contribute to something called as behavior. The first of them is the nature, the person, where we are looking at skills and abilities, the personality, perceptions, attitudes, values, and ethics. And the environment is also equally important, which looks at the organization that the person is a part of, the work group, the job, and the personal life. So, taken together, here is not the place where we say that nature has more primacy over nurture or vice versa. No, it is taking the two together which influence behavior in the long run. Now, moving ahead, we go to the third determinant of personality, which is also called as the socialization process. Now, socialization process is basically also shaping the kind of learned responses that we as individuals often display. Now, it starts with the first connection of the infant with the mother. Now, today, socialization is of great importance in organization, and an organization should take care of the following in their socialization process. They should provide a job which is challenging to the individual. They should ensure that necessary training is imparted. Ensure timely and consistent feedback to the employee. Select a capable superior to take care of the socialization process. Work out an interesting orientation program for new recruits and ensure that new recruits are placed in work groups with high morale. Now, socialization is often taken as the rite of passage of individuals into the organization. So, if I have joined an organization new, as in I am a fresh joinee, I'm a fresh recruit, how do I view the organization? That view, that perception to a large extent is shaped by socialization. So, for example, if I'm looking at the third point here, that ensure timely and consistent feedback to the employee. I think this has become all the more important in the case of the Gen Y and the Nexters. Why? Because Generation Y is a generation that demands immediate and constant feedback. So feedback from a mentor in the process of socialization is very, very important. Now, the if we are looking at ensuring that new recruits are placed in work groups with high morale, that is also important because when people are among people who are positive and who are satisfied with their jobs, they have the tendency to shape positive perceptions in the mind of freshly joined recruits. Now, the other point that organizations need to take care of in the process of socialization is that you appoint mentors who are good or well versed in the art of mentoring rather than people only with many numbers of years of experience, but people who are not largely well versed in the art of mentoring. And to make mentoring a self sufficient and rewarding activity in an organization, it is important to key it into the performance appraisal of the person who is involved in mentoring. So, socialization also has its own impact on shaping the or determining the personality of an individual. Now, the last of determinants are the situational factors, which is looking at the contingency perspective also, that personality, though stable, can change as per situation. So, if you are put in situations which are very unusual, like what we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, things which were unknown to us, things which we never thought that we would be doing, people were capable of doing such things. The situational requirement even gets extended to the place of work of the individual. Today, the work environment has become very challenging and demanding for the employee. That is the reason why people are expected to flex and adopt themselves in different situations that they are expected to. Now, the social learning perspective states that it is the situation interacting with the human being, which includes the individual's personality, which acts as an important antecedent to behavior. So, once again, it's not the nature versus the nurture debate, it is the two taken together which propel individual behavior. For example, we may have a certain kind of personality, a certain kind of mental makeup, certain attitudes, values, but very often, though all of these aspects are relatively stable for them to be called as a part of a person's personality, these points may change depending on the situation that we are in. And very often, when we are subjected to extreme situations, we tend or we do things that we are normally not capable of doing. So, if I look at today's discussions and the highlights here, we moved on to the last theory of personality, which is the self theory, which helped us complete all our discussions on the theoretical influences on personality, namely type, trait, psychoanalytic, social psychological, and the last was the self theory, which had four factors to it, which of course started with the self image, the ideal self, the looking glass self, and the real self. Now, moving on to determinants of personality, we started with biological or what is innate to an individual, internal to an individual, and the six biological factors, which can have the impact on personality. And the next thought was on culture and family. How does culture impact personality? How does a family, through a caring or a non caring home environment, involve or impact personality? Then the last two determinants were socialization process, where we spoke of organization, socialization, and situational factors, right? So today's highlights also include the discussion on the nature versus the nurture debate, where we're not talking of primacy, but we are basically looking at both the things interacting with one another to produce something called as human behavior. So in today's session, basically, we've looked at the theories and the determinants of personality. Thank you for this patient hearing. Happy learning to all of you.